We talk a lot about these, marketing performance indicators, right? A term that obviously kind of conjures up the KPIs that we're all used to hearing about, key performance indicators. And if you sort of change the subject a little bit and talk about these metrics that we are always focusing on, right? At tier 11, it's the CAC, MER, LTV, right? Effective cost per new visit, all the kind of important sort of marketing health, business health type connector, if you will, indicators. Those are such an important part of how we look at everything, how we measure business, how we recommend things to our partners and our clients. uh, what I'm interested in is how the traffic and creative worlds treat those two things the same or treat them differently. What a CAC, MER, and LTV mean to creative, for example, and how does the creative industry, I guess, factor into that? How do you take those things into consideration? And then, what is that? How does that contrast against the way traffic would use those numbers?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think this is where people and agencies and brands, this is where the silos come in. Like these metrics have to be separate from creative. These metrics have to be separate from, like what traffic's doing, what creative's doing, where I still have to, like, on the creative side, I still have to focus on these things. Like, it's the health of the overall business. So regardless of like creative or traffic, it's things that we have to do to work together in order to make sure that we are hitting those numbers together and not necessarily, separate. So I think, in terms of like CAC, LTV, things like that, I think it's important for the creative side to still make sure that they know those KPIs. I don't necessarily know like if it fully hinders us, because again, we're not so focused on them, because it's still, it has to work together with traffic. But it is something that we still have to have, like, we still need to be aware of, like how we're actually driving the performance with the creative, how we're being able to lower CAC with the creative that we're producing, things like that. So again, it's just more of like, we don't want to silo it. We still have to have those metrics. I just don't know if it's like the biggest hindrance in terms of on the creative side.
Mm-hmm. John, do you have any extra thoughts on how creative sort of overlaps here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's interesting is there's always like the cart before the horse. It's is creative performing or not performing because of the creative or because of the traffic that's being driven to it. It's almost the same way with CRO. Like when you're talking about like after the click or like the website optimizations that you're gonna be doing, is a landing page performing? Is the creative good enough? It almost, the step one, I think, before you can judge creative and before you can even judge engagement on a page, you have to understand, is it the right traffic? The right message on the right page delivered to the wrong person makes it look like it's the wrong message on the wrong page. So when you're looking at traffic, that is kind of, in my thought process, step one to get in line before you can see, is the creative and is the landing page actually effective? And how is that being compared to the previous creative and the previous landing page? So there's always like step one, traffic has to be really easily identified and verified that it's quality. Then you get to do your kind of creative testing. And that's where I think that those two always break down. When you're utilizing Google's or Meta's black box, your creative is A/B tested against itself. So what I mean by that is, we could have a great ad that performs well to cold traffic, but horrible to warm traffic. That's absolutely a thing. Do you have people that are existing customers, existing website users on a completely different product or service that are getting ads about a completely different product or service? Now your warm traffic is not engaging, but that amazing ad that's introducing a product to cold traffic that's never seen that product before, that would be interested, could be amazing. So it's not necessarily that warm traffic engages better. It's, is the messaging that you're delivering going to previous users, previous customers, previous people from 250 days ago, which is absolutely a thing that we see quite often with Performance Max and Manage Plus, and even just automated targeting through both channels, or using things like bid caps, cost caps, max conversion value with TCPA, or sorry, max conversions with TCPA, or max conversion value with TROAS. Those are all things that actually affect who that offer goes towards, but they also produce the best quote unquote in-app metrics. And that's where the MPIs, the market performance indicators, those will be outside of what in-app is trying to get. So there's all these different entities working against each other at the same time, and that's why this has become so difficult. But it stems with traffic first. You can't test creative if it's the wrong traffic. I know that's the most rudimentary way to think about things, but when we all just assume that Meta knows what it can do, then you get people in Lauren's position is either, scolded or patted on the back, depending upon the traffic, not necessarily the creative.
How do we get rid of this creative versus traffic blame game? Because that's like totally the wrong perspective to take as a marketing team.
Yeah. I think the stages, it's almost going back to funnels. That's why it's like, if you roll it back 10 years, which is so stupid to think about, but it really worked. I mean, that's what caused the Wild West of digital marketing. There's no school that teaches this. There's no university that has this down. There's no standard operating procedure. It's all skill set based. It's 100% skill set based, in my opinion. I'm going to piss a lot of people off here. It's harder than things like surgery or welding. Like, you have some standard operating procedures with years of training in order to do something a specific way. This is like, I don't know, sophisticated wild ass guessing. That's pretty much what we're doing. And the problem is if you're siloed, I'm going to use a campaign type that makes it look the best in app, which is going to pigeonhole creative in terms of scale. And now my ROAS looks amazing, but now Lauren's creative doesn't scale. Like, it doesn't work that well. People don't like it. Like, it's such a skill set based thing that if you're going to standardize this, you standardize it in a way of what are people going to need to see first? What are things that need to be talked about first when introducing your product or service to cold traffic? What is the proven elevator pitch that built your company for the last 10 years? And let's not ignore that. Let's exacerbate it. Anytime that you can take an in-person translation to a digital property is the best about your business. And that's where I think a lot of companies miss, is don't necessarily recreate the wheel. You're trying to exaggerate what has worked through paid media. So if you're not saying, let's go and talk to new people, i.e. traffic, and let's not, change the tone, messaging, and what my company has been built on, i.e. creative. If you don't change those two, or if you don't have those laid out into a what do people need to see first, then second, then convince, then remarket, and then convert it. If you don't have those messages delivered at the right time, then this thing all breaks down. And it sounds so stupidly simple. We just assume that that's actually what's going on, and rarely is that the case. But that's what you have to do, is you have to go back to kind of, and I wouldn't even say funnel, like step 1, they do this, step 2, they do that, step 3, they do this. I don't think that really works anymore. People's attention spans are way too short, and the ability to retarget people have been reduced by 70% anyway. But the way to introduce and the way to convince, don't reinvent that wheel. You want to exaggerate that.
Yeah. I mean, I literally have to echo everything John just said, because again, it's one of those things. That's why, again, like I'll keep going back to it, that traffic and creative have to work together, because like John said, I can't sit here and make a piece of creative that isn't going to go to the right audience. Like, I need to know where things are going, and that's why I have to work so closely with them. So I think it's just one of those things people just, again, they always assume it's one versus the other, where it's like, no, everything works together. Like, you can't have one thing happen and the other thing happen, because if it doesn't happen together, then it's just not, it's misleading and doesn't really work.